Hi everyone, it's Nini. I'm reviewing Matthew Perry's book, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. Matthew battled addiction his entire life and lost his battle in October 2023 at the age of 54. He said, "When I die, I want helping others to be the first thing that's mentioned. Addiction is far too powerful for anyone to defeat alone. But together, one day at a time, we can beat it down." My goal is to help honor Matthew's desire to help others. I hope this helps another addict out there not feel so alone, or helps someone who has a loved one dealing with addiction have more insight into the disease.
What advice do you have for people who are trying to become sober?
Don't keep it a secret. Raise your hand and say you're suffering, you are drinking and you can't stop. And then it's like the disease goes, well, if you're going to tell somebody about it, it'll go away for a while. And that's the way it works, but the disease always comes back. That's my advice. Stop being a secret, raise your hand, ask for help.
In Chapter 8, Matthew writes that after Friends, and after the other TV shows, and after the movies, and after another failed relationship, he felt like he was a man who was falling down a mountainside, lost in a raging river, hoping to find refuge on any safe and dry rock. A counselor in rehab suggested that Matthew might like the chaos that comes with addiction. Matthew was offended at first, but then realized the counselor was right. The worst thing in his life was his addiction, and to escape that, he was using drugs and alcohol. He started asking himself good questions. He realized he needed to let himself off the hook for the things that caused damage in his life, such as feeling like he wasn't enough and being afraid of commitment because he was terrified of the end of commitment, and for still being angry with his parents. He realized his dad had left them because he was scared, and his mom had just been a very young mom. He needed to realize the world was not out to get him. He needed to be less scared and know that if a situation came up, he was strong enough to handle it. He wanted to be kind, love well, listen better, and give unconditionally. He writes about a man named Earl who Matthew met in rehab, and he became Matthew's sponsor. That grew into a friendship. Matthew considered Earl a best friend, and he knew it was a bad idea to have your sponsor be your best friend. But Matthew trusted him so much that he said if Earl had told him to only eat green M&Ms for 3 months, he would have been shitting green. One day they went into business together, which Matthew writes was a fatal fucking mistake. Earl created a company that would run sober living houses around LA. Matthew invested $500,000 in the company. He and Earl traveled around advocating for drug courts. Matthew turned his house in Malibu into a sober living house that he named Perry House. Not enough people attended his Perry House, though, and it floundered. Matthew had to sell the property. He asked Earl for his $500,000 back, but was still waiting for it at the time he wrote the book. His friendship with Earl was over. They had years of being best friends, sharing their lives, and working to help addicts, and that was all over. Plus, he was out $500,000. Matthew was heartbroken, and he relapsed again. He got sober again and ended up using creativity as an outlet and wrote a play called The End of Longing. It's about 4 friends in a bar trying to find love. Matthew starred as Jack, an alcoholic egomaniac. He was nervous to play the drunk scenes every night, fearing that they might trigger him, but it was important to him to show how low a person can go. The play premiered in London's West End. Matthew invited the ex-girlfriend who he had spent 6 years with. Like I said, I think is Lizzie Kaplan, but I could be wrong. They had remained friends, texting here and there, or meeting for occasional lunches. But she said she couldn't make it to the play. A while later, she sent him an email saying she was getting married and had no room in her life for friends. Okay, that is harsh. Matthew didn't reply, and he said they've never spoken again, but he's glad she got married and is happy. In Chapter 9, Matthew writes about seeing the light go on in someone's eyes when he is helping them get sober. Knowing he has helped an addict makes him feel good. He says that is all God's doing, though. But he writes he also sometimes wants to tell God to go F himself for making his road so hard. He writes again about how getting sober seemed easier for other people, but it was hard for him. He wondered why was it harder? Why was his road so difficult? But when he helps someone get sober, those questions wash away. He knows that is one of the reasons he survived that night in the hospital on ECMO. He talks about his love life and says he has made more mistakes than Elizabeth Taylor. Once he got into his 40s, he was done sleeping with everybody. He wanted to find someone to share his life with. And he would have liked to have kids. He always loved kids and thinks it's because he was so much older than his half-siblings when they were born. He loved babysitting them and playing with them. He says there is no greater sound than a child's laughter. And oh my gosh, is that true. I am so grateful to have my 2 nieces and nephew in my life because if I'm having a bad day, they can instantly turn it around. And they are a vital reason for why I've been able to maintain sobriety from opioids for 5 years. Matthew began dating a woman named Laura. At an AA meeting one day, he met a woman named Rome. Matthew writes he then made a mistake and notes, "Do we ever know we are making mistakes while we are making them?" Matthew wanted to see where things with Laura would go, but he was also very intrigued by Rome. So he started dating both women. He says he does not recommend doing this. He ended up falling in love with both women, which he didn't even know was possible. After 6 months, Matthew knew he had to pick one, and he chose Laura. When he told Rome, she screamed at him for 2 hours. As he and Laura's relationship deepened, Matthew had his usual fears that if she got too close to him, she would leave him. He didn't want to do what he had done so many times before and leave her first, so he started taking pills again to try to squash his fear. But 6 months later, Laura broke up with Matthew. Matthew went back on Suboxone and checked into a sober living house. One night he bought $300 worth of flowers and went to Laura's house to try to get back together. He told her he wanted to marry her and have children with her. And then Rome walked into the house. It turns out Laura and Rome had met at an AA meeting and became friends, and eventually realized what Matthew had done. He said the bulk of their conversations were probably about how much of an asshole he was. Matthew says 7 years later, he made amends to Laura and Rome, and they accepted it, and they were all surprisingly friends. The women both started dating other men. Matthew said one night he invited them all over to his house for dinner. The women then left with their boyfriends, and Matthew was left in his house, once again, alone. In the interlude between chapters 9 and 10, Matthew tells a funny story about how he looked up to Chevy Chase and had been a huge fan of him ever since seeing him in the movie Fletch. They met later in life when Matthew participated in a charity tennis event. Matthew had a very hard serve, at least 100 miles per hour. As Matthew stood on the court, Matthew threw the tennis ball in the air and swung hard at it. One thing he struggled with, though, was controlling where his serves went. This one went directly into Chevy Chase's crotch. Poor guy. That's where I'll end the video for today. I hope you come back for my next video as I continue reviewing this book. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.